So my next story is that it has to do with China's response to the trade war that has kind of been ramping up between China and the U.S. And China is the world's biggest producer of rare earth metals, and it supplies about 80% of our imports of those metals, which, among other things, are used in solar, wind, and battery technologies. And now, apparently, the Chinese are considering cutting exports, or at least threatening to, of rare earth metals to the US in order to improve their bargaining position in upcoming trade talks. And the kind of larger concern that some people have raised is like, look, if we are dependent on wind, solar, and batteries as the green movement wants, then we're just going to become more dependent on countries like China, and we'll have less fuel security at home, or less energy security at home. And I mean, there's some legitimacy to that, in the sense that, all else being equal, it's good that we are the world leader in the oil and gas that actually powers our civilization. But I think it's important to keep in mind that, I mean, these concerns are actually overblown, that China has some leverage here, but not a ton, because the it's not that they're the only possible providers of rare earth metals. And in fact, they restricted exporting of rare earth materials back in 2010. And what do you know? The price rose, and then you saw a bunch of capital invested in mines in other parts of the world. And so China's share basically dropped from about 100% to around 70% of, supplying the world with these metals today. But I do like the fact that there's greater attention being brought to rare earth metals and their role in the technologies that Greens are promoting, because the Green movement does not want to talk about that. Like, the whole game is portraying their sources as clean and fossil fuels as dirty. But I mean, the whole reason that we refer to rare earth metals as rare is not because they're actually rare, but they're just very difficult to mine. And part of the difficulty involves just a lot of pollution and expense. And so, like, you could do it in the US, but here you would actually have to obey environmental laws and not hire children, and to do the labor. And so, like, that's what would make it very, very expensive to do here, even more expensive than it is today, which is why you have things like batteries that are completely unsuitable for storing energy to power an entire society. And so what's basically happened is that, wind and solar are built by outsourcing this mining to poor countries with poor labor protections and poor environmental practices. And I think that is like, that needs to be well known. And we need to get away from this completely false narrative that somehow it's like, oh, these are clean, and, fossil fuels produced in a country with, some of the best environmental practices on earth are somehow dirty. Stefan, any thoughts?
Yeah, so one big reason to be opposed to all kinds of trade wars and trade restrictions, besides, against actual enemies of your country, is that all of these processes are quite complex. So it's portrayed as, yeah, wind and solar, we take the sun and the wind, but you don't take the sun and the wind. The sun and the wind are, of course, the primary energy source, but you are taking very complex pieces of technology, and this requires a lot of manufacturing and so on. And it's like this Milton Friedman pencil example. Nobody knows in the world, no single person knows exactly how to build a pencil, because there's so many processes involved, to get all the different parts and manufacture them and trade them across oceans, and then assemble the thing together. And with something like a wind turbine or a solar cell, it's actually even more complex. And yeah, this involves a lot of things, a lot of processes. And I don't fear a commodity war, because I think China is very aware that there are other sources. I remember that even in Central Europe, there were some people exploring the possibility of opening up mines here once these prices shot up for rare earth metals. And yeah, it's one thing we can derive from that is it's always a good idea to make it possible for domestic industries to, grow to their fullest potential. So, as you mentioned, one of the big reasons in Western countries, in industrialized countries, we don't produce a lot of rare earth metals, or maybe even none. I think in Australia and Canada, maybe, is that the costs are very high. And that makes very little sense, besides local potential pollution issues, because, yeah, the American ton of rare earth metals will be much, much, much cleaner than something produced in China or Africa, of course. So we should make sense of environmental regulations to protect, you know, local people, but we shouldn't do it to just ban entire industries that are vital to every piece of technology we use.